My dad ignored me my whole life, but was the perfect father to my younger brother. Now, I make more money in 1 year than he did his entire life. And Blake asks me to visit him because he's sick, but I made it this far without him. I'm 32 years old. I work as a software developer for a pretty well-known company. Can't say which one because of the NDA, but let's just say it's one of the big ones. And I make more in a year than my father made in his entire life. Which sounds arrogant, but it's relevant to what I'm about to tell you. The thing is, a few weeks ago my younger brother, Blake, contacted me on Facebook after like 5 years of us not talking, saying that Dad was sick and that it would be good if I went to visit him. I left the message on read. I don't know if that makes me a bad person, but after everything that happened, I honestly don't feel like I owe that man anything. And to understand why, I need to tell you the whole story, because it's something I've been carrying with me since I was a kid, and it basically shaped who I am today. Let's start from the beginning. When I was little, my dad Kenneth practically didn't exist in my life. And when I say he didn't exist, I mean he was there physically. He lived in the same house and everything, but he was like a ghost. He worked in construction and always came home late, tired, in a bad mood. I was like 6 or 7 years old, and I remember once I had a baseball game, my first official game in a little league, you know? I was super excited. I'd been practicing for weeks. My mom Stephanie took me, obviously, and I kept asking, "Is Dad coming? Is Dad coming yet?" She just told me he had to work, but I could see in her face that she hadn't even told him about the game. I spent the whole game looking at the stands, waiting to see him arrive. He never came. And that was basically the story of my childhood, me waiting for my dad to show up and him never showing up. There was another time. I must have been like 9 years old, when I won an award at school for a science project. It was a solar system made with styrofoam balls and paint. Nothing fancy, but to me it was a big deal because I'd worked on it for weeks. The teacher sent letters to all the parents inviting them to the awards ceremony. My mom went, obviously, with the camera and everything. My dad said he'd come after work. Spoiler alert, he didn't. I remember being on stage, receiving my certificate, and looking for his face in the crowd, and only seeing my mom clapping like crazy. When I got home that night, he was watching TV, and didn't even ask me how the ceremony had been. My mom showed him the certificate, and he said something like, "Oh, that's nice," without taking his eyes off the television. The worst was when I fell off my bike and split my knee so bad I needed stitches. I was like 10 years old. My mom rushed me to the hospital, me bleeding everywhere and crying from the pain. She called my dad from the hospital to let him know. You know what he did? He said he couldn't leave work because they were in the middle of an important project. But he didn't show up until like 9 at night, when they'd already given me the stitches and everything. Hospital room, and asked me if I was okay. I nodded, and he left to talk to my mom outside. I heard them arguing in the hallway. My mom was furious, but he kept making excuses about work, about money, about how someone had to support the house. And that's how my whole childhood was. I mean, my dad was basically a walking paycheck. He provided financially, I guess, but emotionally, it was like I didn't have a father. My mom made up for everything, honestly. She was amazing. She went to all my school events, helped me with homework, listened to me talk for hours about whatever I was interested in at the time. We were a team, her and me. My dad was more like an indifferent roommate who lived with us. And then, when I was like 12 years old, my mom got pregnant. It was a total surprise. Apparently they weren't planning it because they were older. My mom was like 38 years old. Blake was born, my younger brother, and suddenly everything changed. And when I say everything, I mean absolutely everything. My dad, the same man who had missed every important moment of my life, suddenly transformed into Father of the Year. I'm not exaggerating. He was at the hospital when Blake was born, crying with emotion. He'd never seen him cry. He took days off work to help with the baby. He installed a crib in their bedroom that he assembled himself, when he never even helped me put together a Lego set. At first I thought, well, maybe he matured, right? Maybe now that he's older he understands what it means to be a father. But no, it wasn't that. It was specifically with Blake. With me, he was still the same absent and cold guy as always. It was like Blake was born, and suddenly my dad discovered he had the capacity to love, but it only reached one son, and that son wasn't me. When Blake started to grow, to walk and talk and all that, my dad was there. He took him to the park. They played in the yard. He taught him things. It hurt me to watch them, if I'm being honest. I was like 13, 14 years old, and I felt this mix of envy and rage watching the relationship they had, the relationship I never had with him. And the worst part is that everyone acted like it was normal, like I shouldn't feel bad about it. My mom tried to explain it to me. She said that Dad was in a better place in his life, that he'd matured, that I should be happy for my little brother. And I tried. I really tried not to be a resentful brother, but it was hard not to feel like I'd basically been replaced. And then, when I was 13 years old, the worst thing that's ever happened to me happened. My mom died. It was super quick. A brain aneurysm that no one saw coming. One day she was fine, the next day she was in a coma, and 3 days later she was gone. She was only 42 years old. It was devastating, obviously, because she was literally my only source of love and support in that house. Without her, I was basically left alone with a father who had never loved me and a 1-year-old baby, brother who didn't understand anything. The months after my mom died were the darkest of my life. My dad was devastated, which I understand. But his way of dealing with grief was to shut down even more. And since Blake was so little, he dedicated all his attention and emotional energy to him. I was left in limbo, dealing with the loss of my mom completely alone. No one asked me how I was. No one noticed that I was barely eating, or that my grades were dropping. It was like I'd become invisible. It was during that time that I discovered computers and coding. It sounds kind of cliché, the lonely kid who takes refuge in technology, but that's literally how it was. My mom had bought me a used laptop a few months before she died for school, and I started spending hours and hours in front of it. At first, I just played video games to distract myself, but then I found some programming tutorials on YouTube, and something clicked in my brain. I was fascinated by the idea that you could create things from nothing, just with code. It was like magic, but logical. I became completely obsessed. I spent all my free time learning to program, first HTML and CSS, then JavaScript, then Python. I signed up for forums, followed tutorials, did small projects. It was the only thing that made me feel good, the only thing where I felt like I had control. While my family life was a disaster, I had this digital world where things made sense, where if you did something right, it worked, and if you did it wrong, the error told you exactly what was wrong. There was no ambiguity, no emotional rejection, just pure logic. By the time I was 15, I was pretty good. I'd created a couple of websites for local businesses for free, just for practice, and I was learning mobile app development. My dad had no idea about any of this. He was never interested in what I did in my room for hours. Meanwhile, Blake was like 3 years old, and my dad was super involved in his life, taking him to swimming, lessons, playing soccer with him in the yard, things he never did with me. One day, I must have been like 16, I was working on a project I was super excited about. It was an app for organizing tasks and reminders. Nothing revolutionary, but it was really well done for my level at the time. It had a nice interface, it worked well, I was proud of it. And for some reason, maybe looking for that paternal validation I never had, I decided to show it to my dad. I went into the living room where he was watching TV with Blake, who was like 4 years old by then, and I said, "Dad, look what I made." I showed him the app on my laptop, explained all the functions, how I'd programmed it from scratch, how long it had taken me. I was so excited showing him, thinking that maybe, just maybe, this would be something that would connect us. He looked at the screen for like 30 seconds, nodded, and said something like, "That's good, son, but don't waste all your time on those things. You need to focus on school." And he went back to watching TV. Blake didn't even turn to look. I stood there like an idiot with the laptop in my hands, feeling like I'd been slapped. I wasn't asking him to name me the next Steve Jobs or anything. I just wanted him to care, to see that I was good at something, to be proud of me for something. But he didn't care. He never cared about anything I did. I went to my room and never tried to share anything with him again. From that moment, it became crystal clear to me that there was no point in seeking his approval because I was never going to get it. High school years were basically me in survival mode. I got good grades because I knew it was my ticket out of that house. I kept programming more and more, taking small freelance projects here and there, saving every penny I earned. My plan was to go to college, study computer science, and never look back. Aunt Marilyn, my mom's older sister, was basically the only family who paid attention to me. She lived in another city but called me often, came to visit when she could, remembered my birthday. She was good people. Although she had her own financial problems, she worked as a secretary and barely made it. But she always tried to be there for me. When it came time to apply to universities, I had it all planned out. I'd researched which schools had the best computer science programs. I'd applied for scholarships. I had a portfolio of projects that was impressive for someone my age. I was accepted to a state university with a decent program, like 3 hours from where we lived. It wasn't MIT or Stanford, but it was good, and it was my way out. The problem was money. Even with financial aid and student loans, I needed help to cover expenses. One night, I gathered all my courage and talked to my dad. I explained the situation, showed him all the numbers, how much I needed, how he could help me with part of it while I worked to cover the rest. I was like 17 years old, about to turn 18, and this was basically my last chance to have some kind of connection with him, for him to show me that even a little bit, he cared about my future. His answer was devastating. He told me no, that he wasn't going to waste money on a career as unpredictable as technology, that I should study something stable, like business administration or accounting at the local community college. That programming was just a fad, and that tech jobs weren't secure. All this while he was literally spending thousands of dollars on Blake's soccer classes, on his travel team, on summer sports camps. I reminded him that he never went to any of my events when I was a kid, that he never supported me in anything, and that the only thing I was asking him for was this one thing. His response was that he provided a roof over my head and food, and that was enough, that I was almost an adult, and it was time I learned to fend for myself. We argued badly that night. The first time, I really yelled at my dad. I told him everything I'd been holding in for years. All the resentment, the pain, the feeling of abandonment. He got really angry, told me I was ungrateful, that I didn't understand how hard he'd worked to support the family. The irony of him telling me I didn't understand his sacrifice, when he never understood, my pain was almost comical. The argument ended with him telling me that if I wanted to go to college to play with computers, I should do it, but not to count on his help. And that's when something in me completely broke. Or maybe I finally accepted what I always knew. That my dad had never loved me, was never going to love me, and there was no point in continuing to expect anything from him. The next morning, I packed my things. I didn't have much. Honestly, clothes, my laptop, some books, my freelancing savings that I'd kept in a bank account since I was 16. I told him I was going to live with my Aunt Marilyn. He barely looked up from the newspaper and said, "Okay." Blake was eating cereal at the table. He was like 6 years old, and he watched me leave without really understanding what was happening. I felt a little guilty about him because he wasn't to blame for anything, but I couldn't stay in that house one more day. My Aunt Marilyn lived in a tiny one-bedroom apartment, but she welcomed me without hesitation. She set me up on the living room couch, which became my bed for the next few months. She knew the whole story because my mom had told her a lot before she died, and because I'd called her crying several times over the years. It was incredible to have someone in my corner for the first time since my mom died. One day, I came home from work. E was working part-time at an electronics store, and my aunt was sitting at the table with 2 of her work friends. They called me over, sat me down, and my aunt told me she'd been talking to them about my situation. It turned out that the 3 of them had pooled money together to help me. With college, it wasn't much, like $3,000 total, but combined with my savings, scholarships, and loans, it was enough to get started. I started crying right there at the kitchen table. I couldn't believe that these women who barely knew me were doing more for me than my own father. My aunt hugged me and said, "Your mom would have wanted this, and we're going to make sure you get your chance. I started college that fall with a determination I didn't know I had. I was still super angry, hurt, but I channeled all of that into my studies. I threw myself completely into the computer science program, taking all the classes I could, working on side projects all the time. While other students went out partying on weekends, I was in my dorm room programming, learning new frameworks, building applications. It's not that I didn't want a social life, it's that I had something to prove. I don't know if to my dad or to myself. Probably both. Every penny I earned from my freelance work, which by that point was more consistent and better paid, I divided into 3 parts: basic expenses, savings, and a part to pay back my aunt. She never asked me to pay back the money. In fact, she got upset when I tried to give it to her. But I insisted. She'd given me a chance when no one else did, and I was never going to forget that. In my second year of college, I started working on a more serious project, an app I'd been planning for months. It was a platform to connect tech freelancers with small businesses that needed a digital presence but couldn't afford big agencies. I worked on it every free moment I had, refining the code, improving the interface, adding features. It was good, really good. Some professors saw my work and encouraged me to keep developing it, to think about turning it into a real business. I didn't hear anything from my dad or Blake during all that time. Nothing. Not a call, not a message, nothing. My aunt told me that Blake asked about me sometimes, but that my dad told him I was busy with school. The truth is, it hurt a little to think about Blake, because he was just a kid, and it wasn't his fault. He was born in the middle of all this family dysfunction. But I also didn't have the emotional capacity to deal with that relationship while trying to survive and build my future. By the time I graduated, I had a working prototype of my app, experience from multiple freelance projects, and contacts in the industry I'd made through hackathons and networking events. I got a job at a tech startup almost immediately after graduating. The starting salary was decent, not amazing, but way more than my dad made in construction. I moved into my own apartment, small but mine. Aunt Marilyn came to help me move and cried when she saw my place. She told me my mom would be proud, and I cried too because I knew it was true. The thing is, since then, it's been a constant climb. The app I developed in college, I eventually sold to a larger company for an amount of money I never thought I'd see in my life. I changed jobs a couple of times, each time moving up in position and salary. Now, I work in software development for, like I said, a pretty big company, and I make more money than I ever imagined making at 32 years old. I have a nice apartment, a good car, financial stability. From the outside, I guess my life looks successful. But the truth is, there's a part of me that's still that 13-year-old kid standing in the bleachers at a baseball game looking for his dad. No matter how much professional success I have, no matter how much money I make, there's a hole there that nothing can fill. And the most messed up part is that I know my dad is never going to fill it, that he probably doesn't even understand that hole exists or why it exists. When Blake contacted me last week saying that Dad is sick, my first reaction was to feel nothing, or maybe a kind of cold emptiness. Blake is like 27 years old now. He's an adult, and apparently he still has a close relationship with Dad. He wrote me a long message saying that Dad has heart problems, that the doctors aren't sure how much time he has left, that it would be important for me to go see him. That Dad asks about me sometimes. That maybe it's time to make peace. The truth is, I don't know what to do with that information. Part of me, a small sad part that's still that kid looking for approval, wants to go, wants to have that conversation, wants to hear him say he's sorry. But the bigger part of me, the part that survived and thrived despite him, not because of him, knows that apology is probably never going to come, and even if it did, would it really change anything? Would it erase all those years of feeling invisible, unloved, abandoned? I responded to Blake 2 days ago. Just told him I'd think about it. I still haven't decided anything. Aunt Marilyn says I should go, that I'll regret it if I don't, that forgiveness is more for me than for him. Maybe she's right. I don't know. What I do know is that I got to where I am without him, and that makes me feel proud and sad at the same time. Proud because I proved I didn't need him. Sad because I never should have had to prove it.